Hey guys, a little bonus episode here. Paul Moses is back with us, and he's going to tell us a really interesting, hitherto unknown story about Al Capone. At least I didn't know it, and I'll bet a lot of you guys in Chicago didn't know it. So, Paul, start out read something out of your book and lead us into that story, and then expand on it a little bit, if you will.
Well, first of all, the people in Chicago surely know that Al Capone came from Brooklyn. On this particular case in 1925, he went back to Brooklyn. It was at a point in his life where his son was dealing with hearing problems, and there was a doctor in New York who Capone felt could take care of it. He was not well known in New York at all. The newspapers didn't really catch on to who he was. So we begin with a woman named Anna Lonergan. Her brother is head of a gang called the White Hand, which terrorizes the Brooklyn waterfront. Okay, at that point, the Irish gangs had that control, and the Italian gangs were moving in. Anna Lonergan knew plenty well what she was supposed to say to reporters or cops, and more importantly, what not to say. She was the newspaper's queen of the mob, after all, having briefly been married to the leader of Brooklyn's Irish White Hand gang before his untimely death. She was also sister of his successor, whose own premature death had drawn her and a newspaper reporter to the family's apartment in a brick walk-up at 738 Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn on the night of December 26th, 1925. It was bitterly cold when Richie Lonergan's corpse was brought home from the city morgue at about 6 p.m., a bullet wound over one eye. Wind howled at up to 40 miles an hour, and the temperature was plunging toward 11 degrees after a relatively warm Christmas day. Anna, a 29-year-old former Broadway showgirl with blonde hair and big blue eyes, had wept earlier that day when she and her sister Mary identified Richie's corpse at the Kings County morgue. Like Anna, Mary Lonergan was not unfamiliar with the sight of blood. She had fatally shot her 6'2" red-haired Irish immigrant husband, John, a one-time bare-knuckled boxer who had sparred with John L. Sullivan, in what a jury accepted to be an act of self-defense. For Anna, this blustery day after Christmas marked the third time she had identified a shooting victim in the morgue. Her father and first husband had preceded her brother. Now, Anna was just angry, burling mad, as she would have put it, so much so that she came to the dangerous brink of violating the underworld code she knew so well by nearly identifying the culprits who had killed her brother. They were foreign gangsters, she declared, boldly vowing to use the ample proceeds from Richard Lonergan's life insurance to trace and identify them. I think they were foreigners, she told the Brooklyn Eagle reporter. No, I don't know who, but you can bet it was no Irish American like ourselves that would stay a mean murder like this on Christmas Day. What happened was that the Italian gangsters have been tracking these Irish gangsters, and they did drink a lot, and they found out that Denny Meehan Richard Lonergan rather was hanging out in this bar down the waterfront area. They went and they went in there and shot him, killed him. But as I said, Capone was in Brooklyn for this. He and his wife were worried about their son, their only child. He needed surgery to drain an infection from his inner ear. I guess, as they would know in Chicago, Capone's son was kind of bullied in school. Capone had grown up first in a neighborhood right on the Brooklyn waterfront, and later along, I don't know if it just means anything, 4th Avenue, Garfield Place. The house is still there. He worked for Johnny Torrio as a up-and-coming young gangster. He married May Coughlin, who was Irish origins. So May stayed home that night when Al went out to a place called the Adonis Social Club. When Capone arrived at the Adonis around 2 a.m., the festivities were in full swing. Lonergan, that's their target, had ordered up a weepy, sentimental song, even though Jack Stabile, he was the owner, had said he wanted to ditch the teary stuff. Then the piano player pulled out the music for one of the memorable hits of 1925, Yes, Sir, That's My Baby. The accounts vary what happened next. According to Rose Adelius, she was one of the women in there. a guy named Needles Ferry, who was one of the Irish gangsters, was the first to recognize Capone, and a trio of gunmen with Frankie Yale. That was the name I forgot to say. Frankie Yale was a big Italian. He walked in with a trio of gunmen, including Capone. A stunning fusillade filled the room. Women screamed and dove to the floors. Chairs were hurled and broken in the mayhem that followed. Witnesses claimed that the lights were shut off, but police wouldn't believe that. In other words, they said they didn't see anything. Rose Adelaus ran out. She was the coat check, leaving a gold cigarette case engraved with her name. Oh, here. No, Alva Callahan, the coat checker, left her own coat behind in her rush to get to the door. Mae Wilson, that's another woman in there, seated at a table on the edge of the room, would tell police she turned her face to the wall, covered her ears with her hands and screamed. And Alphonse Morelli, his wife and two children who lived in the upstairs apartment, said they slept through it all. At least that's what they told detectives. For police, it was always this way in gangland hits. No one saw or heard anything. When it was over, Lonergan and his buddy, Aaron Harms, lay dead on the dance floor. Needles Ferry ended up outside in the gutter. James Hart, a 24-year-old white-hander, was shot in the right side and found crawling on a street at Flushing and Throop Avenues, about 5 miles away. And two others from Lonergan's gang escaped unharmed. Afterward, Al Capone and Stabile were among 9 people arrested and held in jail. Capone's friends showed up loaded with cash to pay a high bail, but the magistrate refused to release him. Capone was still little known enough for some news accounts to describe him as a bouncer or a doorman at the Adonis Club, but the Brooklyn Standard-Union reported that police said he had made a large fortune in bootlegging in Chicago. The charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. Capone was released on New Year's Day and celebrated the holiday at a party on 4th Avenue, at which he, Torrio, and Frankie Yale all gave speeches. So he was free to continue his wars in Chicago.
Very interesting, Paul. I really appreciate you telling us that story. That's a great story. The night that Frankie Yale and Johnny Torrio and Al Capone, famous Chicago mobsters, by the end, take out the leader of the White Hand Gang or the leader of one of the Irish gangs. So that's a heck of a story.
And eventually the Brooklyn waterfront does become Italian dominated, both in terms of the union and I think also in terms of the racketeering that went on. The Manhattan waterfront stayed Irish.
Oh, really? Huh.
That was kind of the resolution. Yeah.
Fair resolution. We'll take this and you guys will take that.
The union leader for the dock workers in Brooklyn was Paul Kelly. Kelly, and Kelly, of course, is a very famous gangster from the late 19th century who kind of went sort of apparently straight as a labor leader. 1919, President Wilson appoints him to a mediation board to resolve a huge dock workers strike, infuriated his enemies in the union, right? Because he was sort of legitimized at that point. But, Paul Kelly, goes on. His New York Times obit doesn't even mention that he was a gangster. And he was a big gangster in the 1890s.
Wow. He made that transition.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul Moses, guys. In the book, in that particular book, and this bonus episode is The Unlikely Union, the love-hate story of New York's Irish and Italians. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks a lot, Gary. It's a pleasure.